And we are live. Tim, can you hear me?
Yes, we are live with scary. That was a scary thing to say.
Nothing to be scared about. So you're visiting us all the way from Sweden.
Yes.
Can you say hello in Swedish?
Hey,
Hey, that's a
that,
word
that
I
part's easy.
understand.
Yeah. My sister visited me here one time years ago, and she found she was perfectly able to say hey to people because you say that in the southern United States too. So yeah,
Hey.
yeah. Hey,
So a quick reminder for what Pride in the Living Room is all about. So this project was founded by the Israeli LGBT task force Agudah, the Agudah, in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv Gay Center shooting and the Jerusalem Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And the Agudah created this project to offer a stage and a voice to LGBT Jews from around the world to share their stories, to encourage empathy and community. So all of that said, it is my pleasure to welcome you, Tim,
thank you.
to share your story. Tim, over to you.
All right. Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning, which is a long time ago. I was born in Mississippi and grew up there. And I grew up Southern Baptist in Mississippi. The Jewish part comes in much later. Um, and I'm not sure how old I was when I realized I was gay, but I was pretty young. So I kind of came up with this knowledge kind of in the background, even when I was quite young. And one thing that I remember is when I was younger, it's a little complicated actually. When I was younger, I had lots of friends at school, but I think I became kind of alienated from people later. And I think in a lot of our stories as gay people, especially as gay men, we kind of tend to realize a lot of times that we're gay when we hit puberty, somewhere around there. And the feelings start. But for me, it was a little bit different because um, I'm going to talk a little bit about my schooling now. I went to kindergarten when I was 5, which is normal in the US. And then the following year, I was in first grade for 2 weeks. And then they bumped me up to second grade. And I was living in a very small town in Mississippi with my parents and my older sister. And I spent second grade, third grade, and fourth grade there at that school, which, by the way, because this is rural Mississippi and this is the early 1970s, this is what is called a segregationist academy. It was founded the same year that I was born, and it was founded so white children wouldn't have to go to school with black children. But that's where my parents had me and my sister in school. Excuse me. And then after I had been in fourth grade, we made a change because I was still very bored in school. I started going to school in Jackson, which is the capital of Mississippi, and it's a decent sized small city. It's no New York, it's no Chicago, it's no Melbourne, but it's basically a couple of 100,000 people. So it's a larger place. The town that I grew up in is about 2,000 people. But I started going to school there during the week, and it was much better for me academically, but it was a lot worse socially because the kids I was going to school with were a lot older than me. Well, I say a lot. They were mostly 3 or 4 years older than me, but at that age, it's a big difference. I was 9 and they were 12 or 13. And so I didn't really have friends at school anymore. And that was kind of a problem for me. And I started to feel kind of, I don't know, alienated more. than I had when I was younger, because when I was in school in my hometown, I was friends with pretty much all the kids in my class, the boys and the girls. I got along with everybody, But so that kind of, once I did hit puberty and started feeling, having sexual feelings and stuff, it was a lot harder. And I remember being being the object of some remarks that were passed in my classroom. It was never a big deal, but it happened a couple of times, and that was a little bit hard for me to deal with. So, but anyway, I graduated from high school in May. I'm not telling you what year. I've pretty much already told you about my age and everything, but that's okay. But I graduated from high school in May, and I turned 15 in June, and I started college in August, all in the same year. And things were a lot better for me when I was in college because people were a lot more matter of fact about my age. People in college, I think, were more serious. High school was kind of something you had to get through. And the people who were in college, they were a little more serious about being there. So they weren't there to so much to put other people down. The dynamic was different. So I was very relieved to be in college. One interesting thing is I need to find these if I can, but I think they're probably in storage in the US. My senior year in high school, there was a story about me in the newspaper in Jackson. And my freshman year in college, there was another story about me. And I was smart enough to, when they interviewed me for the story my freshman year in college, I made a remark and they quoted me, and this was the remark. I said, "Do you realize I won't be old enough to date freshman girls until I'm a senior?" And I was 15 years old and I knew I was gay. But I still felt like I needed to put that remark in. I still kind of felt like I needed to be somebody that I really wasn't. And I was struggling a whole lot during those years with being religious and being gay. Because, having grown up Southern Baptist, I had grown up with these ideas that, that being gay was bad. And that the Bible said, don't be gay. And of course, as a Christian, there's a term that some gay people in the U.S. have for these Bible passages, which is they're sometimes known as clobber verses, because if you're gay, people use them basically to hit you over the head with, And if you're Christian, you've got some of those in the Hebrew scriptures, and you've also got some of them in the Christian scriptures. And so you kind of get a double whammy, and it's hard to deal with. But I think it was when I was a sophomore in college that I ran across a book called The Church and the Homosexual by John J. McNeil. And one of the things he does in that book is he talks about different ways to think about all of those clobber verses and how you can kind of reframe them to have a different significance, and not necessarily to be blanket condemnations of gay people, And that was a big, big deal for me as a gay person. It kind of, excuse me, as it turned out, that kind of gave me the freedom to embrace myself a little more as a gay man. I said gay man. I was a sophomore in college. That means I was 16, so I was still a little bit young to be a gay man. But I say that, but also what I haven't mentioned is the fact that when I was a sophomore in college, I told somebody that I was gay for the first time. It was a guy from my hometown who was also a sophomore in college. We didn't go to the same college, but he went to a college in the Jackson area just like I was, and I used to ride back and forth with him. And one time when we were riding back to Jackson from our hometown, I told him that I was gay, and I remember it took me about 20 minutes to get the words out, and I was crying. And I'm pretty sure that he knew what was coming because he'd known me, for years. And I'm pretty sure that there were rumors about me in my hometown, about me being gay. And I mean, it was tough, it was tough to tell him. And I also developed, I mean, I don't want to exactly say a crush. I mean, on some level, I think it was a crush because because I found him very physically attractive, but I became very emotionally dependent on him. I mean, I actually transferred to his college for 2 terms, because I just felt very dependent on him and I needed to be around him. And during that period, I had a lot of people around me who were very religious. And so they were basically trying to tell me either that I shouldn't be gay or that I wasn't really gay. One of the things you will get a lot of times from Christians, if you're gay, I shouldn't say from Christians in general, but from more right-wing evangelical Christians, is that you're not really gay. This is an idea that Satan put into your head, And this also, I think, is where the whole idea of conversion therapy comes from, is they think of it as a demon that they want to exorcise from somebody, And so I was kind of moving in a more religious direction during that period. But I transferred to my friend's college in January, in the middle of an academic year. And I was back there in the fall, and something happened during that term where there was a guy who was a freshman. Of course, I was a junior now, 3rd year. And there was a guy who was a freshman who was also gay, and we kind of found each other, and we didn't have sex with each other, but we became friends, and we were able to talk about our feelings. But there was another guy involved who, my friend, this guy, the freshman guy who was gay, who he had a crush on. It was another freshman. It's a little bit complicated to explain all the relationships that are involved, so I'll try to shorten this a little bit. Basically, it became known that this fellow, whose name was Angus. He went by Angus. I have friends who knew him later in life after I had moved away, and he began using his middle name later, which was Alan. Thank goodness, because poor guy Angus. I mean, oh dear, But anyway, there was another freshman whom Angus was like really kind of infatuated with, who was straight, and he found out that we were gay. He realized that, and he asked Angus some very pointed questions about himself, about Angus, and then about me. And so this kind of started to get around. And there was a day shortly before Thanksgiving, so toward the end of November, when a guy called me into his room, and he was making all this inane conversation. And then at a certain point, he just said, "So Tim, rumor has it that you're going back to Millsaps," which was my first college that I had decided to transfer back to. "Rumor has it that you're going back to Millsaps because you're a homosexual. Is that true?" Now I'm sitting there, and I want to emphasize, I'm 17 years old. And I'm sitting there in this guy's room, and I'm like, and I had to make a calculation, and this is what I thought. I had been seeing a counselor at the college, and one of the things he had told me was, he said, I mean, he knew the whole time that I was gay, but I told him this was kind of starting to come out. And he said, the thing is, he said, "I will tell you, I've been here for about 20 years, and I've seen this happen before, and this is what happens." He said, "The administration will call you in." Now, I have to emphasize also, this is a Baptist school, okay? He said, "The administration will call you in, and they will ask you pointed questions, which you will have to answer, and then they will give you 72 hours to get off campus. And I was like, so when I'm in this guy's room and he's like, so we hear you're going back to Millsaps because you're a homosexual. Is that true? So I'm sitting there thinking, I don't want to waste this semester. I want to take my exams. I want to get my grades. So I said no. And that was basically the end of the discussion, you know. And I finished out that semester. I got my grades. I transferred back to Millsaps where I had started out. Millsaps, which by the way is a Methodist college, but back then was very, very liberal. Not so much anymore. It's gotten less liberal, I think, as time's gone on. But, and Millsaps is also the school that when I was planning to go there, my older sister said it was a queer school. I was like, okay. And I was sitting there in my head going, yeah, that's part of the reason I want to go there. But anyway, so I went back to Millsaps, and part of what I was feeling was a lot of revulsion against what I had experienced at this Baptist college. And I was turning kind of very strongly in the direction of aligning myself with gay people, you know? And so I kind of turned away from religion pretty sharply at that point. And so it was that, so I went back to Millsaps in January, you know, again in the middle of an academic year. And that semester I just started getting to know some people who were more gay positive, basically, you know. And then in the autumn of that year, I came out. That October, I had sex for the first time, and I went to a gay bar for the first time. So I basically count that as my coming out. And my birthday's in June, so by then I was 18, so I was all legal and stuff, you know. And back then, this was before you had to be 21 to go to bars in the US. So I was actually able to go to the bar legally, you know, and that was helpful. But yeah, I came out, and I mean, I started going to the bar. I mean, I went to the bar quite a lot. I've never been a drinker. I didn't drink then, but at that point, you know, I was meeting a lot of guys, and to use the euphemism that we used back then, I was going home with a lot of guys, or they would come home with me, you know. So I was, you know, pretty sexually active back then. I mean, I will tell you what year this was, because this also has significance for wider gay history. This was October of 1983. So AIDS was known. It was out there. It was already killing a lot of people in New York and San Francisco. I was in Mississippi, where it was not widespread yet, but we knew about it. And in 1983, we still didn't know what caused it. So it was a little bit of a scary time, you know, but I mean, we talked about it quite a bit, and I still remember where I was. I was in my car, and I know exactly where I was in my car when I heard the news over the car radio that they had discovered HIV, which they initially called, I think it was HTLV3, something like that. Yeah. And so that was kind of a big deal. I guess the thing is, excuse me, I stayed in Mississippi for a few years after that until 89. And it was, you know, pretty much the same. You know, I would go to the bar, and I'm leaving out something that I don't want to talk about. But anyway, in 1989, I moved to Washington, D.C. I had gotten very interested in sign language and deafness and deaf culture, deaf people. And in the summer of '89, I went to Washington for 2 weeks and did a sign language course at Gallaudet University. And after I went back to Mississippi, I decided to try to find a job in Washington and move there. And I was able to find a job there. I moved there in October. October seems to be kind of a watershed month for me a lot of times. But anyway, um, I moved up there in October, and I lived in DuPont Circle, which back then was the gay neighborhood. Things have changed, but one thing I liked about being there, and this is also a big part of me in a way. One of my life goals now is never to own another car. I hate cars. I don't like dealing with them. I don't want them. So I have to live in places where I don't have to have a car. That rules out Mississippi. You know, I can't really go back to Mississippi and live, because in Mississippi you pretty much have to have a car. It just doesn't work otherwise. So so I moved to DC, and I lived in DC for about 4.5 years. And I was very tied into the gay community in DC. And the thing is, I also had friends in Sweden, and this is kind of a little bit of when I was at Millsas back in the spring of 1984, there was a guy who visited basically, and we had a fairly intense fling while he was there. And I stayed in touch with him over the years. And so in the early 90s, while I was living in DC, this friend came and visited me, and then I visited him. And then I came back to Sweden. I say came back because I'm in Sweden now. I came back to Sweden a second time in the summer of 1993, and that time I was mostly in Stockholm, and I really liked Stockholm. It felt very comfortable, and when I got back to Washington, a couple of weeks later, I found out that the company I was working for had a project going on in Stockholm, and I was like, I'll go. And I had already studied Swedish for a year. So I already knew a little bit of Swedish, you know, and I had been doing that basically just for fun because I like to learn languages. And so I got on that project, and I moved back to Stockholm. I moved to Stockholm, that is, in March of 1994. And one thing I found here, I've always found it difficult to plug into the gay community here. And I think there are a few reasons, and I think some of it's me, and I think some of it's Sweden. My perception is actually that gay people in Sweden are this very strange combination of open and closeted. By the way, we've only gotten to about 1994. Am I going too slow?
No, I'm really enjoying your
Okay.
story.
Okay. All right. Okay. I wanted to make sure I wasn't taking too much time. Okay. So gay people in Sweden, in my experience and my perception, they're this weird combination of open and closeted. Swedes tend to be generally very open about sexual orientation in general. They're not bigoted against gay and lesbian people generally, or as far as I know, bisexual people. And they also, from what I have seen since I've been back here, because transness is kind of more in the forefront now, they're also generally pretty open about transness as well. But there's also a strong strain in Swedish culture that is, don't stand out. It seems to me, and I actually have heard Swedes say this, and it seems to me that this is true, that many Swedes want more than anything else to be ordinary. They don't want to stand out from the crowd. They want to blend in. And if you tell people you're gay, you're not blending in. So I found it at times difficult to even find gay people. I've worked with people that I'm in the past that I was pretty sure were gay, but they never said anything, you know? And so I was always kind of unsure whether they were actually gay or not. And in some cases, a couple of years later, it'd be like, oh, you know, I'd be talking to somebody and, you know, somebody else about this person, and the person I was speaking with would be like, oh, you know, he and his partner, you know, he and his guy, and I'd be like, okay, so he is gay. Okay, who knew, you know? So I will say that during the years I lived in Sweden the first time, which was from 1994 to 2005, I kind of became detached from LGBT community. And I moved back to the United States in 2005, and one thing that I found was that I wasn't able to get that back. And this is a little bit upsetting for me, because it really is a loss. It hurts not to have that connection to that community. But anyway, I moved back to the US in 2005, and because I couldn't stand being in Sweden any longer. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the same thing now, so this is a little bit difficult. But anyway, so I moved back to the US in 2005, and it took me a few months to find a job. And when I found a job, it was actually a job in Lower Manhattan. And I was living in New Jersey, and I was there for about 7 months, and I didn't like the job. And it was hard for me to see my friends, because most of my friends were in the city, and going back and forth, just in terms of transportation, was a challenge. So I didn't get to see my friends as much as I would have liked. I had friends in New York, you know, but I didn't really get to see them that much. So after about 7 months, I moved back down to Mississippi, and I took a job down there. And part of the reason I did that was also that my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I felt that I needed to be near family right then. So I ended up staying there for the better part of 5 years. My job kind of soured because I was kind of letting myself be used in a way to do, and I wasn't being really compensated for what I was doing. So, and also, boy, did I hate having to drive a car. I hated having to own a car, and I hated having to drive everywhere. And one day, out of the blue, a recruiter called me about a job in Washington. And I was like, Washington again? But I agreed to talk to them, and they ended up bringing me to Washington for an interview, and they decided to hire me. And so in 2011, I moved back up to Washington for the second time. And I lived there for the better part of 5 years. One thing that happened while I was there was I had a couple of friends who became very special to me. One was a guy I had met during a visit to New York back in 2002, and he's still a very, very, very close friend. He is modern Orthodox, and he never really tried to pull me in, because Jews don't do that. Jews don't recruit. But I'm kind of a curious person in general. I like to learn things. And so I would sometimes ask him questions about because when I was around him on Shabbat, you know, I would ask him questions about his Shabbat practice. He and I traveled together around Europe by train back in 2005. And so I was exposed to more of both his Shabbat practice and his kashrut practice during that period. And so I had questions for him, you know, and I like to learn things. And he would he'd tell me a little bit about his practice and, drop little bits of Yiddish and, the kind of Yiddish expressions that American Jews tend to know, and but like I say, he never actively, tried to pull me in or anything. The other person that I became acquainted with was when I was living in Mississippi the second time. I made friends with a guy who was a trans man and also a Jew by choice. And that kind of started the wheels turning in my head a little bit about Judaism. And when I had moved to Washington, one thing I found out was that there was an LGBTQ synagogue in Washington. And so one Friday night, I should say, I went there for services. I just decided to show up and try it, Well, it was Pride Shabbat. And I didn't know it was Pride Shabbat before I went, but it was Pride Shabbat. So it was a room full of people, lots of people there. And it was a very interesting feeling, because it felt like I belonged there, and it felt like I knew that I was supposed to be there. The congregation is called Bet Mishpacha, and they have their own siddur, which they used, which back then, in 2013, was a spiral-bound affair that was still a draft and had been in draft for a long, long time. And I'm sitting there, using this spiral-bound siddur, which fortunately had transliteration of the Hebrew, because otherwise I would have been like, but I'm like just following right along with, with everybody else. As a matter of fact, there was a guy who I happened to sit next to, and I was talking to him at the Oneg afterward, and he said, so, you really know the liturgy. And I was like, I've never seen any of this before. But it just, I don't know, there was something that felt right about it, And so after that was my Friday night thing. I went there every Friday night. And that autumn, I took an Introduction to Judaism class. And during the run of that class, the rabbi of Bet Mishpacha, excuse me, it's early in the morning here in Chile. The rabbi of Bet Mishpacha was talking to me at an oneg, and I told her that I would like to have the materials for her Wednesday night class, which was a class on little known women of the Bible. And I just thought that sounded really interesting. And I said, I'd like to have the materials from your class if you could make a copy of them. I can't attend the class because I'm going to an Introduction to Judaism class. And she said, wait, you're not Jewish? I mean, you fit right into the community here. And she had arrived to take up her duties at Bet Mish about a month after I started going there. And so she just thought I was just another member of the synagogue, And she said, well, if you have any thoughts about converting, let me know, and, we can talk about it. Well, she and I sat down at lunch. We had lunch in January to talk about conversion, and she asked me some questions about, what I was feeling and what I wanted to do and everything, One thing that was funny was she had actually come and picked me up from work and taken me, but since she did that, I bought lunch for her. And one of the things she told me, I'm just going to say this in passing, is she said, she hesitated a little bit when I offered to buy lunch, and then she said, okay, this time, but she said, when you're my conversion student, I can't let you pay for anything because I'm not allowed to sell a conversion. I was like, okay. But after lunch, she dropped me back off at work, and then she called me, and I was like, what's going on? So I answered the phone, and she said, I forgot to ask you a very important question, and all you have to say is yes or no. And I said, okay. And she said, are you circumcised? And I was like, yes. And she said, okay, good. That makes things much easier. So anyway, I just thought that was a good thing I didn't have to engage in a conversation about that while I was at work. And also I was about to go into a meeting, but anyway. But so she, I continued to go to services at Bet Mishpacha regularly, basically every week. And that December, I had also started going to Shabbat morning services. I had initially found the idea kind of intimidating, but I started going, and of course, it was not intimidating. It was lovely, and I got to hear the Torah read, and it was fantastic, So I continued studying with her, during 2014. And I will say that at Shavuot in 2014, she and I went to Tikkun Leil Shavuot together. And Shavuot is my favorite holiday because you stay up late, you learn stuff, and you eat dairy. And so this is a holiday that was completely made for me. So Shavuot is absolutely my favorite holiday. Because I'm a night owl and I love to learn stuff, and I love cheesecake and ice cream. Bring it, come on. So we were at Shavuot together, and there was a Shacharit service that morning, which is like, oi, that service started, I think it started at 4:50 in the morning, and it was over at like 7:15. Because this was a traditional. We were at a conservative shul, and we were in a little room, and it was gorgeous because when the service started, it was dark. And during the service, the sun came up. And during the service, they had the windows open for ventilation. During the service, the birds started to sing. And it was absolutely beautiful. And at one point during the service, I think the rabbi and I were both dozing off a little bit. And at one point during the service, I think she sort of woke up a little bit. And I had been following along in the Siddur. And she said, "Where are we?" And I wasn't totally sure, but I listened for a minute. And I heard what they were saying. And I actually was able to find it in the Siddur, the Hebrew. And I was like, "We're here." I pointed to her. I pointed to it in the Siddur and showed her, So after the service was over, she and I were outside chatting a little bit before I was going to go home, and she was going to have a sleep nearby at the rabbi's house. And she said, "You take the time you need to feel ready." But she said, "As far as I'm concerned, you're ready." So I took a little bit of time, but in August, I told her I wanted to schedule the Beit Din. And I had my Beit Din about 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah that year in September. And the rabbi told me, she said, "This is actually a good thing because you won't have very much to repent of at Yom Kippur." So, but anyway, so yeah, and I stayed in Washington until the spring of 2016 when I moved to New York. And the reason I moved to New York basically was I wanted more Yiddishkeit. I wanted more Jewish life. There's actually a good bit of Jewish life in Washington, but it's not like New York, where you are surrounded by Jewishness everywhere. From what I understand, there are about 1 million Jews in New York. And you don't get that kind of Jewish life everywhere, So, and I was working remotely in New York. But one thing I will say is the project that my company had hired me for had ended in August of 2015. And we were both floundering a little bit, me and my company, because they didn't really know what to do with me anymore. My group had kind of changed its orientation. And they had me doing stuff that wasn't necessarily exactly what they needed. And what they needed, I didn't have the skills for. And also in July of 2016, the company did a very large merger with an English company. I honestly think they did it so they could move their tax home to London, but that's another story. And I also think they were looking to reduce headcount. But anyway, they ended up letting me go in January of 2017. And I wasn't able to find anything in New York. I was looking for work in New York and just was not able to find anything. And I was pretty sure that I would be able to find work in Sweden, where there's a severe, severe shortage of IT people. So I moved back to Stockholm at the beginning of April 2018. And of course, it's terrible because it's Goetia and it's just not, yeah. But anyway, just not good. I don't want to talk too much about now because it's depressing. I really don't like where I am, and I actually am making some moves to see if I can get back to New York because I know that the United States is on fire right now. The United States, of course, has been low key on fire for decades, but it's really kind of blown up now. But I honestly just think I personally would be better off there than I am here. You know. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know what I've missed. I probably missed a lot, but anyway, yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much, Tim,
Well,
for taking the time to share your story.
sure. Thank you for
Um,
listening.
it's what this project is all about. Um, I think that you have an incredibly important perspective. Um, from one example, being a Jew by choice, coming to Judaism much later in life, and finding a place within Judaism that marries with your identity as a gay man, and being able to cultivate that on your own.
Can I say something, Jared?
Please.
I talked about being disconnected from LGBTQ community. One thing I've noticed since I converted is I would much rather be in a Jewish non-LGBTQ space than in an LGBTQ non-Jewish space. But the very best spaces for me are LGBTQ Jewish spaces. When I was in Washington, I was active member of Congregation Beit Mishpacha. When I was in New York, I was an active member of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, which is the largest LGBTQ synagogue in the world. And that's really where I'm most at home, are in those spaces. So I just wanted to say that. That's all. Yeah, you reminded me of that when you said that. I'm sorry.
No, 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 please.
Yeah.
This is your story. Um, what does Judaism mean to you?
That is an enormous question. See if I can give it a suitably enormous answer. Um, some of the things I like about Judaism are things that I did not like about Christianity. Um, I like the fact that Judaism is a religion of asking questions. Christianity, to me, too often and too much is a religion of swallowing answers, ready-made answers. And my experience of Christianity, at least, was that there was not a lot of questioning. I know there are varieties of Christianity that are not like that, but particularly in the United States, mainstream Protestantism too often is about knowing things and having the answers and being able to spout them on command. And a saying that I like, I'm going to give you two sayings that I like. When I was in Washington and started to become connected to Judaism, a friend of mine asked me if I was abandoning Christ. This is a friend who's very committed Christian. He's gay, and he had actually tried to help me find a church when I moved back to Washington that second time. And so he said, "Are you abandoning Christ?" And I said, "This is a saying that supposedly is a Hindu saying that I've heard. And I think this is something I've always believed on some level ever since I was a kid. There are many paths up the mountain, and they all lead to the same place. So it doesn't matter which one you take. The only person who's wasting time is the person who's running around and around and around the mountain, telling everybody else they're on the wrong path." And I really believe that. And I try to have a lot of respect for other people's paths. because I think we're all trying fundamentally to get to the same thing, but there are different paths that work for different people. So part of the thing is I think Judaism is the path that works for me. The other saying I was going to give you is this: the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. And I think a lot of Christians, and I'm going to say again, especially in the US, because that's where most of my experience is, they've seized onto certainty, and they feel certain. And what they're in, to me, doesn't really seem like faith. It's more cult-like, and they think they have the answers. And that doesn't speak to me at all. So one thing I like about Judaism is the fact that you're supposed to ask questions. One of the things we say about the Torah is turn it and turn it, for everything is in it. We don't have just one view of it. You're supposed to be able to turn it around, look at it in different ways, and think about it in different ways. So that's one thing. And this may seem shallow, but I kind of don't care. Music is a very big part of my life, and music is a very big point of connection for me with Judaism. I think that's one thing that helped me really come into it and help bring me into Judaism, is the music is really, 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 it really resonates with me. And I don't know, there's something about it, and maybe this is chemicals in my brain, I don't know, but it really, the other thing is also, excuse me, it's also the history and the body of knowledge. It's so intimidating. But I also kind of like that. I'm doing Daf Yomi, and when I say I'm doing Daf Yomi, all I'm really doing is reading the Daf every day, and I don't understand everything, and I don't have a Charuta partner, so I'm not studying with anybody, so I'm not doing this in the ideal way, and I know that, but I'm going through it, and I'm using the Koran Talmud Bavli, which is a really good set that has lots of notes, and the notes often refer to, one interpretation of this is here, and here are 4 places you can find that interpretation, and another interpretation is here, and here are 5 places you can find that interpretation. And most of these are things that I have heard of, but know nothing about. They often refer to the Tosefta. I don't know what that is. I know it exists. I know it's Jewish. I know it's like commentary of some kind, but otherwise I don't really know what it is. But I like that. I like the fact that there's a lot to dig into and a lot to learn. When I was converting, I was must buy all the books because I love books, and this is kind of part of my nature. So I think I would say all these things are points of connection for me with Judaism. Boy, I'm talkative. Crap.
I have 2 more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
What does the gay community mean to you?
I kind of covered that, and the short answer is not much. The wider gay community at this point, like I say, I have trouble connecting with LGBTQ community now, and I don't really know why that is. I'm not sure whether. Sometimes I think my values have changed, and I don't necessarily share a lot of the values that one tends to find in LGBTQ community. I'm honestly, I'm really not sure, but I don't feel a lot of connection to LGBTQ community. So I think basically that's my answer. Wow, I was able to be brief for once. Crazy. Excuse me.
Okay, I'll ask something else. Um,
Sorry.
you have spoken a lot about the challenges that you faced throughout your journey, the moments when what was inside you was coming into conflict with the larger world. And I just wanted to ask, um, Tim, when you are interacting with people who come from a different life experience, people who may not fully understand you, what gives you strength in those moments?
I'm imagining such a moment. So hang on. I think in a lot of my past experiences that I've talked about, that you're talking about now, you're talking about not just somebody who has different life experience, but somebody who's actually um, basically attacking me or being very negative toward me.
Mm.
Because those are the times when you need strength, right? Um, I don't know. I think maybe it's just the fact that I've made it this far, and I know what my beliefs and values are. And when I'm confronted with somebody who doesn't share them and who is attacking them, I don't really, on one level, I don't really care. Unless that person is in a position to do actual harm to me or to somebody else, I don't care what they think. Now, if they're trying to actually harm somebody, that's a completely different story, and the gloves will come off and the claws will come out. You know, excuse me. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about an experience I had one time that's completely different here in Stockholm, where I came into conflict with somebody um, on a bus, or actually after we got off the bus, because he berated the bus driver, and when the bus reached its destination, its final stop, which is where I was going, I went to the front of the bus and I was speaking to the bus driver and saying, you were in the right, and that guy was full of shit. And I didn't realize the guy was standing right outside the bus. So when I got off the bus, he actually started following me, and I ignored him, walked over to a bus stop, and he came and stood in front of me and acted like he was about to punch me, and I just ignored him. I just was like, "What are you doing? Get out of my face, basically. So I completely ignored him, and I will say honestly, it helped that I was wearing sunglasses, so I couldn't make eye contact with him. I knew he, couldn't see my eyes, so I was like, yeah. But, but yeah, I mean, it's weird that I tend to. I mean, I have a temper, but when there are situations of actual danger, I tend to be really, really calm. I don't know why that is, but yeah. So I'm not sure I answered your question even, but anyway.
Well, we do have time for one more question, which
Okay.
is great. So for my final question to you, Tim, and thank you again for being so honest and open. I think that what you're speaking about really resonates with many LGBT Jews out there in the world, LGBT people who grew up in the Baptist community as well. And I I know that there will be many Orthodox Jews who are watching this series of videos, and I hope that they take away something meaningful from your story.
Thank you.
Um, I'd like to go all the way back all the way back
Okay.
to the very beginning.
Oi, okay.
God created the world. No, not that far back. Uh,
I wasn't around then.
um, so you were, let's go back to when you were a young kid. You were just discovering that there was something a little bit different with how you saw the world, and um, you were going through puberty, and you were um, your life journey was just beginning. You were just starting to absorb all these ideas and discovering who you really are. And all these years later, you are some number of years old that we won't go into. With all the wisdom that you've gained, your perspective, if you had a chance to speak to him, what would you say?
Oi. Honestly, sometimes I think that I would say that I would tell my younger self that as soon as he got a chance, he should seek out Judaism. Because really, I think Judaism was always right for me, and I didn't know it until I was relatively far along. My 6-year conversion mikveh anniversary is this coming Saturday. No, it was yesterday. Excuse me. It was yesterday. I've got my calendar off. Yeah. So, yeah, it was September 12th. So, yeah. Um, so it just is only really 6 years that I've been fully on this path. And I mean, I think I would have been a lot better off if I had known this earlier and sought it out earlier. Um, but other than that, um, I mean, I'm thinking of cliches, unfortunately, and I'm just going to say a couple of them. Uh, um, don't let the haters get you down, which I never really did. Well, there were times when I did, and yeah, and of course it gets better, which is definitely a cliche nowadays, But I mean, I needed it. Nobody had ever said that really then, and I needed to hear that then because I went through a lot of agony about my sexuality. I prayed to God to make me heterosexual. God had better ideas, um, but it would have helped me a lot to know that at the time. And I mean, the thing is, I will say, I think I always, even as a small child, I was fascinated by cities. I think I was always kind of a city kid who wanted to get to that kind of place. And so I think on some level I knew that that was out there and there was a different kind of life. But I mean, I think there were certainly times when I was a teenager when I needed to have that reinforced, you know? So yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim, for
Sure.
taking part in Pride in the Living Room.
Well, again, thank you for listening.
Um, do you have any final parting words for us?
I'm not dying. No, I'm sorry, I'm kidding. I mean, I don't know. I'm not usually the one to come up with like profundities, so I don't think so. I mean, I'm very grateful to have been able to participate in this. So, um, you'll, how's this going to be put together? Is this like an archival project, or how does it work?
Essentially, all of these videos are being recorded over Zoom, and then they're being uploaded to YouTube, and then they're being shared through my Facebook group,
Okay.
Jewmos.
Okay.
So you'll be able to watch all of our other videos
Good.
there
Okay.
as well.
Okay. Will you send me a link to that? Thank
Definitely
you.
will.
Okay. Thank you. Because I would like to hear other people's stories as well. So yeah.
And I'm sure there are many people who will be watching this video to hear your story.
Oi. Okay. All right.
Um, all of that said, here's to sharing our story in this moment and many more moments in the future. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Tim.
Jared. Take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too.